Good evening. I would like to call the Tuesday, November 14th, 2023 Board of Selectmen's meeting to order. Can we all please stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. I have no announcements, and there is no one in the audience that wants to speak on something not on our agenda. Jean,
Just entered the room.
is there anything that is not listed on our agenda that you'd like to talk about?
Want to wish everybody happy Thanksgiving in advance.
Oh, that's...
Oh, thank you, Gene. That was thoughtful.
I apologize for not asking that faster.
Yeah. It's usually helpful to scan the room for us to see if anybody is in.
I did scan, and then I looked down for 30 seconds.
I'm just trying to
Came
help
in
you
like a
out.
ninja.
That's all. I figured since I dressed like Fetterman tonight, I would act like him.
All right.
Senator Fetterman. That's right.
So the only agenda item that we have is the public hearing for the FY24 tax classification and possible votes. And I'll entertain a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved. Tim's remote up there, too.
Anybody care to second it?
I will second it.
All right, then. Motion's been made and seconded. Any further discussion? Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Fitzpatrick, aye.
Morse, aye.
Smith, aye.
Bowman, aye.
Excellent. All right. We'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So thank you for scheduling the special meeting for us tonight. It's nice to get this done a week early, and I know Gene appreciates it, so jump right into this. Certainly open to questions anyway through it, and I'll open up the questions at the end as well, but don't be afraid to interrupt me if you come up with a question as I go through. You're not going to fluster me too bad, I hope.
Challenge accepted.
So, start out the presentation, we'll go through an overview of, how we value properties and how we actually calculate the tax rate, what some of the statistics were from sales and how they affect the values in town, and some of the unique things that have occurred, so. Requirements for setting a tax rate. Every 5 years, the Department of Revenue does what's called a reval year. This is what most people are familiar, used to be every 3 years. This is when they come in, they really do a deep dive audit. They'll visit a couple hundred properties in town themselves and make sure we're doing our data collection correctly. We went through that last year. Every year between those, we do what's called interim year adjustment. The work is mostly the same, but we're not as much under a microscope, but we still have to meet the same statistical guidelines on an interim year as we do as a regular year. So the question always comes up, well, don't you only adjust values on a reval year? No, we do adjust them every year. So this year we are in what's called an interim year adjustment. I have to look up there because the Zoom faces are blocking half my screen here. So the tax rate calculation, they call this meeting, where we set the tax rate, when in reality, the tax rate calculation it happens ahead of time, and what this meeting's for is for setting a residential tax factor. So the tax rate calculation is quite simply the tax levy, how much taxes we're going to collect in real estate and personal property, divided by the total value of all that real and personal property in town, times 1,000. Quite simple. So I'm going to start on the side where I do the most work, and that is on taxable value. So I'm going to start with the denominator. I do work that affects on the tax levy, but the bulk of that is predetermined either by Proposition 2.5 or the municipal budgeting process. So when we go into our sales analysis, this is probably where we're going to spend the most amount of time. This is where I spend the most of my time when we're setting the tax rate. I'm going to start down here with what's called the ASR, the median ASR. If you think of the ASR, it is the assessed value of sale property divided by sale price. So it's quite frankly the percentage of value we're assessing it at relative to the sale price. For our largest class of homes, single-family homes, which I think is fairly obvious for Douglas, that ASR needs to be between, the median ASR needs to be between 0.9 and 1.1. In English, between 90% and 110%. The reality is, if I started taking the median home prices and setting them over 100%, there's going to be a line of people at my door, and probably some of them overflowing to your door, complaining. So in practicality, we do that between 90 and 100%. You'll notice we're at 94. There's a reason for that. Each one of these subclasses down here, condos, 2 families, 3 families, commercial, industrial, all have to be within 5 points of our largest class. So if we're at a 94, they have to be between 89 and 99. In addition, they are still restricted to that 90 to 110. So we aim for mid-90s for our largest class of single-family homes. That gives us some leeway to have a low class, such as our condos, a high class, such as our 2 families or industrials, or 2 families or land, but still being below that 100%, above the 90, and staying within the 5 points. So that's where we deal with the ASR. To really get confusing here, this is a statistical measure that's important for myself and for the public to understand what it does. It's called the coefficient of dispersion. What that really means is the median ASR is 0.94. The coefficient of dispersion simply measures the ASRs of all the other properties, all the other 110 properties that we use in this analysis, and measures how close they are to that 94 median ASR. So the larger that number, the more spread out there. What that means is, if it was, that number, we had ASRs like a 20, so 20% of sale, or 400% of sale, that COD number would explode. So keeping it under 10, which is the guidelines, means that most of those ASRs are close, which means we're doing a good statistical analysis and that we're getting good values on the properties based on this. As we go through this process of analyzing and measuring the ASRs, we're adjusting the models for how we value properties. We're increasing land values, maybe increasing a neighborhood, increasing the value of condos, increasing the value of capes, maybe increasing the value of colonials more than capes because they're selling for more. As we go through this process, that raises and lowers the values of all the other properties in town that hadn't sold. And that's the meat and bones of how we do a mass appraisal system. So with that, we'll move over to the LA4. And this is simply the count and value of all property in town. If you talk to anyone in the DOR, any administration from any other town, they'll know exactly what you mean when you're talking about an LA4. Couple of quick highlights on this slide. Single family is up about 9.8%. Condos are up 12%. Now, if you notice in that previous slide, the ASR on condos was only a 90, whereas single family were 94. So we kind of made a decision, I made a decision to really not try and push condos all the way up because they already went up 12%. And you really start, doing a lot of leverage. Everything else was kind of around the town average at 9%, 10%, 11%, with the exception of industrial over here. 3 things are driving that. 2 are very obvious. The Blackstone Logistics Center across 146, we get 8% of that. That was about $6 million of new industrial value. There's new land that CRG purchased for $18 million. Well, that makes that land that was not worth anywhere near $18 million worth a lot closer to $18 million. And in addition to that, when we talk about our sales analysis, we had a couple of industrial sales on Davis Street, namely 120 and 183 Davis Street, that were very high relative to our assessment. So what we ended up having to do is pretty much from Monroe Street to the Uxbridge line, taking those industrial properties there and increasing those based on those sales. So the area around the 146 interchange industrial land and from Monroe Street to the Uxbridge line have all really increased a lot this year. And that's based on sales, the CRG sale and the 120 and 183 Gilboa, that, you really can't ignore that. So, but it is good to see an industrial growth. That was 125% over our industrial base from last year. Just industrial. Commercial stayed relatively flat, and personal property stayed relatively, well, I don't want to say flat, but in line with the regular growth in the rest of town. So what does that look like for our houses in town? Last year, average value of a single-family home was $412, median of $397. This year, again, about 9% increase in single-family homes. A difference of $36,000, $35,600 on median, so pretty close, which you would hope for, but I prefer the number for median, but more people understand average, so. It's just a change in values that people should expect, 8.79%. Looking at our values over time, this is a chart you'll see year after year, so long as you're on this board and I'm presenting. This goes back to 2002. We can see here there's Bear Stearns and all them went out of business. Hit this dip, and then here's where the pandemic came in, and we've all known what the market's been doing since then. So we're up to just under 1.6 billion total taxable value in town now. So that's just trying to put those numbers visually and then give you historical perspective of where values have gone and where they're going now. So we come back to our Andy tax calculation, and we just filled in that $1.59 billion number into our denominator. From here, let's work on the numerator, which is literally how much we're going to collect in taxes. This is really the meat and bones of Prop 2.5. For people that don't understand it, Prop 2.5 simply says we can collect 2.5% more in taxes this year than we could last year, which is what this $464,000 number is, plus new growth. So that's the construction activity, new houses, renovations, all that type of activity in town. For a 2024 levy limit of $19,541.883. That's just pure math. From there, we have the debt exclusion line is added to that. This is voters at town meeting, chose to allow us to borrow money and service that debt outside of the levy limit, so outside of that 19 million, and then subsequently voted it at a town election. So we get to add in the amount of money we're servicing to service that debt. That's what that 1.9 million is there. And that gets us to our maximum allowable levy of 21.5 million. This number is the highest amount we can collect under the law in real estate and personal property taxes. No matter what we choose to do, we can't go past that number. Because we already passed the point where we could do an override or excess levy capacity is, this is somewhat confusing, the $15,598. With a $1.59 billion assessment, a single penny on the tax rate is $15,900 in revenue. So if we were to add a penny to the tax rate, that would make this tax levy number higher than our maximum allowable levy. So really, when you look at that excess levy capacity number, it's the difference between what we could legally collect in taxes, and in this case, what mathematically we can collect in taxes based on how we divide out the numbers. So that's a lot shorter explanation than the last one. Come back to here, again, fill in our numerator. We have computers do the math for us. So we're looking at an anticipated tax rate, should it stay at a single tax rate, 1352. I think that was an 84% reduction from last year, which is typical. We always say values go up, tax rate goes down. So that's where we're at here. And here's a chart showing exactly that. So from 2002, the chart was showing with values, and when we look at this green line, that's your tax rate. So as the values were going up, you have one blip here in 2019. We all know what happened in 2019. We did an override. So that's the one time you saw values go up and the tax rate go up. Here you can see it's dropping as values have gone up. So again, just a visual representation of what we've been talking about. Now, coming back to our average and median tax bills, again, this is I think an important concept of Proposition 2.5 that everyone should understand, especially I think homeowners, and through you, this is why I like giving this presentation to the homeowners. When we look at the, again, difference in values of 8.7 or 9% on mean and median respectively, the difference in the tax bill is $140, $148. And notice the percent, 2.4%, 2.5%. That's what you should expect on your tax bill increase under Proposition 2.5, is that your bill should only move around 2 to 3%, depending on, outside of if you've done an addition or some major renovation, and outside of, possibly having you be in a market that moved more than the average. So if we were, for example, Colonials went up 40% and everything else in town went up 10%. It might be right, but I always say to people, expect 2.5% on your tax bill to go up. If it changes, give me a call. It may be right and we can explain it. It may be wrong and we can fix it. But that's the essence of Prop 2.5 right there is the values went up, tax rate went down, and the tax bills go up the 2.5%. So if we just talked about all that, setting the tax rate, there was a tax rate, all that, why are we here? After the values are set and revenue is all taken care of, you folks get to hold a hearing and decide on what they call a SIP shift, a residential tax factor, shifting the tax rate, splitting the tax rate, different nomenclature for the same thing. Really what it is Mass General Law allows you to shift some of that tax burden from one class of properties to others. They say that generically, you get to take it from the residents and dump it on the commercial, industrial, and personal property taxpayers. Adopting split tax rates does not change the amount of revenue the town collects. All it does is shift it around to who pays it. So we can talk about that $21.5 million that we're going to collect in revenues. That number doesn't change. All it changes is who pays it. And lastly, I'm here to present all this information to you. So, what are our classes of property? Mostly straightforward, residential, commercial, I think we know what that is. I will make one note here when we talk about commercial property. Anyone that's in chapter, so your forestry, farming, and recreational, actually would be considered under commercial for split tax rate. So if we were to split the tax rate, that affects those people. So you kind of give them a tax break on one hand and then would be giving them a higher tax rate on the other side of the equation. Industrial, straightforward. And the other one people get confused about is what is personal property. That's for businesses, their computers, their equipment, their presses, their fork trucks in a warehouse, things like that. What do we want to consider? What do I consider? And what do I like to present to the selectmen when we're talking about splitting the tax rate is what's the percentage of our residential tax base versus the commercial? 92.3 residential, 7.7 commercial, industrial, personal property. About 12 to 1. The residential tax base is about 12 times what the commercial is. You can see in here, I have it broken down between the three. Just shown a different way, if you were to picture these as being 100-story buildings, we're only looking from the 88th story up. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to see the difference in this line. And I can't use my mouse over here because of Zoom, but in those last two columns, 2023, that was 6.2% commercial, industrial, and personal property. In 2024, it's up to 7.7. So 1.5% of the total tax base is now increased by 1.5%, which is a good direction to go. It's a long way to go, but that's a good direction to go. Other issues to consider when we're talking about splitting the tax rate. That commercial industrial base, what's it made up of? Are there large businesses? Are they small businesses? Because when you split the rate, it affects both. So if you have 98% of that commercial property is mom and pops, well, you might as well hit them like they're home. If you're Walmart, my experience, people are like, oh, we'll go after the big guy, we'll go after Walmart, we'll make them pay. And then, the pizza shop, the donut shop, all are getting hit as well. So let me talk about percentage, small businesses, large businesses. Is a small relief for residential taxpayers, an oversized burden on your commercial. And I think I'll demonstrate that better on the next slide, or maybe 2 slides ahead. Will a SIP shift negatively affect investment? I think right now we're at a point in Douglas where we're trying to attract people to develop. Take that into consideration when you talk about raising the tax burden, because for sure their accountants do. And what services do they use? Potentially if you have a commercial in town that has an alarm going off monthly for a bad smoke detector, what is the cost of that service that the town's providing them versus possibly residential, and is that an impact to your decision on splitting the tax rate? So what does it look like when we're splitting the tax rate? Again, when you split the tax rate, and this is mathematically how it works with the state's model, they don't give us a clean, you can take 1 million and shift it over, it's by percentages. And so the lowest amount we could flip over is 0.83%, so 0.0083%. Based on our revenue, that would be shifting about $180,000 from residential to commercial. Doing that would lower the residential rate by 11 cents and increase the commercial rate by $1.35. That's significant. Again, that's 12 to 1. 12 to 1 ratio. Well, they're 12 times the size. So every dollar you take away from the residential, you're adding $12 to the commercial. Putting that into tax bills, here we have our average residential again, and I just added the average value of a commercial, average value of industrial. So saving a homeowner $50 on their tax bill, giving them a pizza night, most of a pizza night, 2/3 of a pizza night maybe. Now you're taking your average pizza shop and costing them $650. And an industrial $922. So when I talked about a small savings being an outsized burden, this is sort of, and these are the numbers based on our actual numbers. These aren't, trying to be hyperbole. This is based on using that 0.87. That's only 1%.
So if we were to ever want to look at a split tax rate, we'd want to get that ratio down from like 12 to 1 to like 6 to 1. Or lower.
I usually think of it in percentages. So yeah, 64. I mean, the decision is yours, but I don't see it being economically viable until you are closer to 50-50. And then you're making, I think, a policy decision versus a massive economic decision. But again, that, on the policy side, I would definitely, that's on your side of the table, not mine. But again, I like to show numbers and then try to give you a visual representation. On this slide, we're taking a look at that blue line. That's your flat tax rate. So that's your 1352. And this is as you progressively, the green line is as you progressively lower that residential tax rate. This is the impact, and here I am going through the Zoom heads again. This is the impact when on the commercial at that same rate. So down here, I have to circle around the Zoom people. Down here, you get to right around $13 per thousand on the residential at the maximum we could split the rate. So you're saving about 52 cents per thousand. And up here, you're just over about almost to 20.50. So you're adding almost $7 to the commercial. Very, very drastic. When you mention your question about where do you want to be, I would think you'd want those three lines very close together before, it's economically viable to the survival of your commercial base before you started looking at, splitting the rate. You get those three lines closer together where, you get maybe dollar for dollar, you save your residents $50, you cost your commercial $50. And where, maybe it's a good policy decision at that point.
So the price of your pizza just went up. The $50 you're saving, you're eating pizza anyway.
Yeah, now your pizza night's $300.
Right.
Yeah, so, other things that I'm supposed to notify you by law during classification hearing, we've already talked about them both, but I put them on one slide so that no one can say I didn't. Excess levy capacity, again, the difference between what we can legally collect and what we can mathematically collect in this case, and our new growth number of 516,227. So I think throughout this, and answer to a couple questions, my recommendation at this point would be a single tax rate at 1352, and I am happy to answer any questions.
I don't have a question, it's a statement. I would agree with your recommendation for the simple fact that we're at the very beginning part of building a commercial base. And the benefit to doing a split base for residential isn't enough to justify the deterrent it's going to be for commercial properties to come in.
I agree. Very well presented, Kristen.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody have any questions, comments, or points of clarification? We're going to want to close the public hearing.
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion's been made and seconded. Can I have a roll call vote, please?
Postma, aye. Fitzpatrick, aye.
Morris, aye.
Smith, aye.
Bone and night.
All right. So I'll entertain a motion on the tax rate.
I would make a motion to adopt the residential tax, single tax rate of $13.52.
Point of order, you'd be
Yep.
entertaining a motion to accept our
Accept.
residential tax factor of 1.
Thank you.
Make a motion to accept the residential tax factor of 1.
Second.
Okay, the motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion on that? Seeing as none, can I have a roll call vote, please?
Postma, aye. Fitzpatrick, aye.
Morris, aye.
Smith, aye.
Bone and night.
All right. And I'll now entertain a motion for adjournment. You're gonna be like that, huh? Mm-hmm. All right, then.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second. I'll
I
third.
just had to check the time and make sure that we're over.
We said entertain. I thought he was going to get up on the desk and start dancing.
You really don't want that? The table won't hold
Probably.
it. All right. The motion's been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Seeing as none, can I have a roll call vote, please?
Postma, aye. Fitzpatrick, aye.
Morris, aye.
Smith, aye.
Bone and night.
All right. Thank you, everyone.